Hello and welcome to The Lens with me, Sarah Travers. The Lens is a business and the community podcast in partnership with One Young World. Welcome to our guests today. They are Catherine Dolton, Chief Sustainability Officer at IHG Hotels and Resorts, and Anouar Ouali, Senior Associate at PwC. In this episode, we'll be discussing global goals and we'll be asking, is everyone pulling in the same direction? So to find out, let's get into the conversation. Catherine, Anouar, welcome to The Lens. Let's find out a little bit about you both, first of all. So Catherine, I think we'll start with you.
Well, thank you, Sarah. Really great to be here today on the Lens podcast. So, as you said, I'm Chief Sustainability Officer at IHG, but I've only actually been working in sustainability for the last 5 and a bit years. I actually have a degree in zoology, which was great at the time. And so actually I've come a little bit full circle in some respects, given some conservation elements. But I trained as an accountant at EY, and I actually joined IHG, or its predecessor company, over 20 years ago in internal audit, before actually transitioning to investor relations, where I spent about 10 years, so selling IHG's equity story. So very much a finance background. And then obviously there's been a lot of talk about ESG amongst our investors. And I was at the point in my career where I was looking to do something different. So I transitioned. I was very lucky to be given the opportunity to transition to lead the sustainability team at IHG. So it's been a sort of an interesting career, and it's kind of come full circle in many respects.
Isn't it an interesting career? And I believe that at IHG, you guys like to have these, are they called squiggly careers?
Yes, that's right. It's really interesting, actually, because we talk a lot at IHG about careers not having a linear journey. You don't start at the stairs at the bottom and climb as far up as you can go. And careers are so much longer now as well, aren't they? Like it or not. So it's kind of like, it's giving people the opportunity to change direction. And, you can have diagonal promotions and, horizontal jumps as I've had. So, I think we feel that it's so important because you really gain so much knowledge and skill from taking those leaps outside of your comfort zone. So that's kind of really what's motivated me in my career and is becoming much more common at IHG as well.
I understand you're the treasurer of the Sustainable Hospitality Alliance and a member of the Business and the Community Responsible Business Leadership Team too. So, you're really throwing yourself into this ESG message. I'd love if you could describe what being a responsible business actually means and what ESG, environmental, social and governance, looks like with your organisation.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And I think it's actually really changed quite a lot in the last few years. If you think about environmental, social governance, a lot of big companies have had very strong governance for a long time. I think the social part of the agenda really came to the fore during COVID, and a lot of companies quite rightly looked at, how they were looking after colleagues and people in society. And I think the environment part of the agenda as well had new meaning during COVID. I think people were kind of not traveling as much, which isn't necessarily good for my business, but I think people were more appreciative of the natural world and all the beauty. So I think that heightened awareness of the climate crisis, it's just become center stage, and the role that companies has to play in that, I think, is really, really key for many stakeholders, be it customers or shareholders for listed companies, or increasingly sort of colleagues. So colleagues want to work for companies who have these strong values. For IHG, for us, there is that intersection between, the impact of what we do and also guest experiences. So that's really, really important for us. Another really important part is that we are predominantly a franchise business. So we've got more than 6,300 hotels across 100 countries, but they're small businesses who own those assets. So really, we are partnering with these small businesses day in, day out to support them through decarbonisation, through reducing waste or water. So for us, it's around how do we develop tools and advice and support to really, really help those individual properties, as well as aligning with others in the industry. You mentioned a couple of the other jobs I have on the side, and there's so much around for sustainability around collaboration. We have our Journey to Tomorrow 10-year responsible business plan, and we very purposefully, that is really all about how we link together with all those different stakeholder groups, because we cannot do this by ourselves in terms of sort of helping to transform to a more sustainable business.
Yes, and at the time of recording, it is 2024. It's hard to believe we're only 6 years off that 2030 goal. Let's bring our second guest into the conversation. Anouar, we'd love to know a little bit about your background. Was it a squiggly career to date?
Thank you, Sarah, and thanks so much for having me on the lens today. My career was a bit squiggly in a sense, especially at the start. I was born in Rotterdam, a city in the Netherlands, and I've lived my entire life in Barendrecht, a small village next to Rotterdam. I studied financial economics at the Erasmus University in Rotterdam, and throughout my studies, I really developed a personal interest in sustainability. Back then, the intersection between sustainability and economics was being studied. However, the topic was not as mainstream as it is today, of course. I wrote both my bachelor and master thesis on topics of finance and ESG. And during my master's, I wanted to gain professional experience to further develop this interest in sustainability. As such, I applied for an internship at PwC's corporate sustainability team. There I had a focus on circular economics, and that was really the start of my career, if you will. This was a really good experience for me. It really helped me to understand how corporate sustainability worked in practice rather than theory, and how I could make a contribution to that. After my internship, I started the deals traineeship at PwC, which is the M&A traineeship, which allowed me to rotate between different M&A teams in our practice. Currently a senior associate in the financial due diligence team, where I have a focus on financial services and real estate. But I am proud to say that since 2 years, we also have a dedicated ESG in deals team, which I helped build. And the team really helps advising buyers and sellers on the most important ESG factors during M&A.
So let's talk, Anouar, a little bit more about those United Nations global goals. Let's just recap, on that big noise when those goals were launched back in 2015, with a focus on overcoming the big problems in the world, centering on things like no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, sustainable cities, and climate action. There are 17 goals in total, so a lot there. But I'd love to find out with each of you, with PwC and with IHG, what your business are doing and how much you have those goals absolutely at the forefront. Anouar, if we stay with you for this one.
Sure. So at PwC, our purpose is to build trust in society and solve important problems. And our global ambition as a firm is to become net zero by 2030, which is more related to corporate sustainability. At PwC Netherlands, we do measure our impact on 4 ESGs. So the long-term ambitions and short-term targets have been set for these 4 SDGs, where SDG 5 and 10 reflect our ambition to create an inclusive working environment. And SDG 8 reflects our role in accelerating inclusive and sustainable economic growth. And 13 then is the ambition to have a positive environmental impact with our operations. And maybe to make it a bit more clear is on SDG 13, for example, climate action. I do really see transformation in our business with CSRD coming around and many of our clients having these new questions around corporate sustainability and ESG, and how PwC is transforming to be able to answer those questions and help our clients in the best way possible. I feel like we're pioneering in a sense. So ESG is different for every company. So we're talking about material ESG factors or the SDGs, which are most material for your business. So assessing what's material and assessing what the challenges are and possible solutions, I think that's really a new way of thinking in some sense. And the global challenges from the energy transitions to to poverty throughout the world. I mean, these are really big issues and challenges for society as a whole. So I don't think it's been easy, but it's been a very cool ride, to be honest. Yeah.
And Catherine, with IHG and your journey to tomorrow for 2030, how much are those global goals at the forefront for you?
Yeah, I mean, they really are. So Journey to Tomorrow, we have three main focus areas. So it's all around people. So promoting well-being in the workplace, championing an inclusive culture and advancing human rights. And we then have our second pillar around communities. So that's really focused on improving. We've got a target of 30 million lives by 2030 around three areas. So the first being around disaster relief, so response to natural disasters. The second being around skills training. So actually, how do we help to get people into jobs, especially around hospitality, to drive that social and economic change? And the third piece really being around tackling food poverty in the communities in which we operate. And then for our planet, we have sort of three separate buckets. So the first is all about reducing our carbon emissions in line with climate science. We have a science-based target as well by 2030. The second is all around waste. So for us, it's all around food waste, single-use items. And then thirdly, another big issue for the hotel industry is around water. So how do we reduce consumption? How do we mitigate water risk and deliver stewardship at that basin level? So we link back and we focus on specific SDGs associated with each of those pillars. But for me, the really big one is SDG 17, which is partnership for the goals. So, this is all about, I talked about the hotel owners that we partner with, but also it's about our colleagues. So a huge area of focus for my team is, and I think many sustainability teams in corporates is around how do we get the whole business behind these initiatives. It's not just about a sustainability team working in isolation. It's everybody knowing what their role is, right from, somebody who's at the front line in the hotel, right through to somebody in finance, through to HR. So a lot what we do is kind of, education, really sort of breaking down. Some of these areas can seem quite technical. So actually really helping everybody in the organization to understand the role that they can play.
And with 2030 looming, do you find it's the big stick works or the softly and a little bit more carrot?
Do you know what? It's a real combination for us. So we are a business, so we have to do what makes commercial sense, and so we have to find those win-win solutions. So things that were, for example, something that we've done over the last few years is we've started to put energy conservation measure requirements into our brand standards. So as a franchise business, that is our enforcement mechanism to say, look, if you want to be one of our 19 brands, these are the things that you have to do. So we're starting to integrate requirements, but we've done that based on, right, these are the things that are going to make economic sense for you. So it's kind of that, it's a combination, I would say, of some carrot, some stick, and providing sort of support for those at the same time. We have a number of different tools, as you might expect. So we have something called Green Engage, which is it's been in place actually for over a decade, and we're just about to relaunch a revamped version. And that is a tool that every single hotel has to use to report its utility consumption, but also it provides green solutions and advice and suggestions. And then something we have produced recently is what we call the Hotel Energy Reduction Opportunities tool, which is a bit of a mouthful, but it's the hero tool. And that was in response to, a lot of people, if you think about a Holiday Inn Express, for example, in North America, they don't have engineers on site. You've got the general manager who might be helping to change the beds and checking the guests in at the same time. So they're like, I've changed my lights to be LEDs. What next? I don't want to spend thousands of dollars on an energy audit. So this tool really gives them the knowledge and the information to know what are the most effective measures for their building. plus other things like, we've produced guidance on single-use items and food waste training. So it's all about those tools to support those owners.
I think there's a bit of fatigue in the world now around the global goals. Since they were launched in 2015, it's currently being reported that only 15% of the global goals are on track. And you've mentioned COVID and Catherine, how we've become more focused on the planet and people. But also, we've got the cost of living now, we've conflict in the world, the climate crisis, everything. It's just too much. So, have we taken our eye off the ball a bit?
I think it's a tricky one, because I think for me, all organizations now, all big organizations, they have their commitments. There've been a lot of commitments over the last few years. But for me, it's about now, how do we actually get things done? And really, that all comes down to how are we engaging, how are we being practical. So for me, it's one thing that we're really starting to think about is, how do you bring customers along on that journey? Just one small anecdote for you, which I love. If you think about food waste that I mentioned before, some of our hotels, they trialed smaller plates at breakfast. So this is kind of where you have a breakfast buffet. So they trialed having smaller plates, knowing that typically there is less food waste, because it's part of your room bill. You'll put less on your plate, therefore there'll be less waste. You can still go back as many times as you like. And so we did that. There was outrage. Customers were like, I'm being cheated. Then some signage was put up saying why we were doing it. And this is in the UK. And everybody was like, oh, of course, that makes perfect sense. And there was praise and there was understanding. So I think there's so much around how we bring guests along on this journey. We know that travelers are looking for sustainable choices. We are now starting to see that through our big B2B customers. They are wanting data on their stay because we form part of their goals, that their travel. How do we empower guests more on this journey with us?
Yeah, it's buying into that loyalty. I stay here because I like what they do, and I'm part of that change, and I understand why. Anouar, where do you stand on this, given that we're making insufficient progress on the global goals?
That's a good question. I would say that every time that something big happens on the global stage, we become distracted from our goals. I mean, COVID was an accelerator to some of these goals because we were limited in travel, for example. But what I do think will help is regulation. So, for example, CSRD will help. That's one for sure. And maybe the other one is also more clarity on the goals. I mean, there's been a lot of terms. It's CSRD, it's ESG, it's sustainable development goals. I mean, it's a lot. And all these umbrella terms, they also create some sort of confusion, I think. Having a level playing field, and I think that the CSRD will help with that, will also help corporates at least to, get more focus on what is material and where should I focus on to become more sustainable in the business.
Yeah, we need to make it easier for people, don't we, Catherine?
Yeah, I was just going to jump in and say I do agree with Anouar that I think that we need to be able to cut. I think regulation helps to a certain extent, but I do also think there is so much coming at big companies. We call it the alphabet soup. There is so much regulation coming in, and it's it doesn't all quite align, and there's now teams of reporting folks, data folk are having to be stood up. And my concern is that gets in the way of actual action. Companies have limited budgets, and it is important to measure, it is important to report, but not if that is at the expense of action actually taking place. And that's my concern.
Yeah, Anouar, how do we deal with this? These teams of data analysts tracking, governing, strong governance, accountability. Is that working?
These are all good questions again, but maybe this has been said more often, but AI is helping in this. Also within our own business, I see that we're doing a bit less data crunching and spending less time on what is less important, so that we can focus on what's more important. I do think we need to give it time in order for us to be able to measure these important things. Our material sustainability goals are important. Once we have that in place, I think we can accelerate. And maybe to finish, a last note on that is also young professionals are really keen to make a good contribution. So I think everybody's looking at a way to contribute, and at least we do not know exactly how to. But I am hopeful that if we give it a bit more time, and with these innovations in AI and young professionals being willful to contribute, that we will be able to make real progress here.
So it was being innovative and showcasing a return on investment as well, making financial sense too to do this. That always appeals to businesses.
It has to, Sarah. It's absolutely key is being, as I said, being able to show that win-win. These are, big businesses who need to drive the change. They are commercial organizations, but I do also think there is a big role for government to play here as well. If I think about our business, our small, medium enterprises, the role of incentives, the role to help make some of these solutions more commercially viable is absolutely key. So that's something that we're doing a lot of, is how do we work with governments to try and get policies and incentives in place to try and make this change a bit smoother.
And that is interesting because you're working in so many different countries with so many different jurisdictions, and some maybe have those UN global goals as a priority and others not so much for various reasons.
Yeah, that's right. And so, something we're doing now is, we did a lot at a group level. As I said, as we're doing more around trying to empower our operations teams to take responsibility and lead on this, we've developed much more regional strategies. So it's actually saying, look, you know what, there are some markets where you can just go faster. Places like Europe, where there is more legislation, where there's more demand from customers, where there are differences in financing for, greener assets, that is much easier. So how do we go at different paces in different markets is sort of what we're going with now.
In fact, Catherine, that you talked about those kind of three pillars, if they're the key areas around people, communities, carbon, energy, and wastewater. How did you fine tune those? People would be very interested with how you came up with things like disaster relief, which again, in one jurisdiction is a massive issue. And in another, they go, oh, that's not something we've given much thought to.
Yeah, well, we have done for several years, we've done sort of materiality assessments, which we're going to be redoing again with CSRD in a much bigger way. But, so that's at the center of that is just understanding what is important to our business and to our stakeholders. And for us, actually, everything feeds up to that community pillar, because we are hotels are often at the heart of their communities. So actually, and we have a very long history of supporting, if you think about there being a disaster in a particular place, often the hotel will be the point of shelter. So actually that's a very natural part for us. So our strategy, the communities piece has always been around, look, what comes naturally to us, what strategically is important. We're not just doing things philanthropically for the sake of it, but what is really strategically at the heart of our business. And that's sort of been the driving force behind the whole plan.
I'd love at this stage to know if you have any questions you'd like to ask each other. Anouar, do you have a question for Catherine?
Yeah, the question that I do have for Catherine is, what do you think will be the main accelerator for your sustainability goals?
I really think industry collaboration, because we're all dealing with these small businesses, and if those small businesses, and often there's quite a lot of overlap, so you might have a hotel owner who owns some of our brands and has some of our brands and some of our competitors, and if they're hearing one thing from us in terms of what we want them to do, and they're not hearing it from everybody else, then that can be a problem. Also, I just think coming together and trying to think about, what are some of the solutions? Some of the big things in our industry are around, how do you effectively measure? Because actually it's not that easy. How do you report? What is the definition of a green hotel from a consumer perspective, right? You've got so many out there. So actually, Sarah, you mentioned before the Sustainable Hospitality Alliance, where I'm a trustee. That's a great organization that's doing a huge amount of work, bringing the industry together, trying to create some of this standardization. So for me, that's going to be the biggest accelerator.
And Catherine, I'd love to know if you have a question for Anouar.
I do. I have a question kind of related to my industry, I guess, and something I'm really interested in. So I talked about we get a lot of data from our B2B customers, but actually, it's harder to gather data from individual travelers. And we feel that often, as a guest, you've got so many different things that you can think about when you're choosing a hotel, be it location, price, amenities. How do you think, and being a younger person, how important is it to you when you're making decisions around travel, those sustainability elements?
As a young person, budget is of course a factor. However, when I look at a hotel in a city that I'm traveling to, then I wouldn't like to be, dependent on a car or any other means of transportation beside of that. So I like to be at the center of things, so I don't have to travel much more than that. So being in a good location is definitely one that's important. And yeah, I do appreciate all the efforts that hotels are doing in sustainability wise. But I think those are the two main points of focus for me when I'm choosing a hotel.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had a follow-up. I know actually you asked me around what I thought would be, key points to accelerate the transition. From the work that you do with businesses, what are some of the key things that you think could be accelerators?
I think the energy transition is one. I mean, that really makes companies transform their businesses. Also, societal pressures. I mean, from society as a whole, we would like to see sustainable investments rather than unsustainable ones. So from the perspective of private equity, which are our largest clients, but also from big corporates, sustainable investments are becoming more in demand and also cheaper to finance. So from a sustainable finance perspective, financing sustainable investments is becoming cheaper. So that's also a monetary incentive for corporates and private equity to invest more sustainable.
Yeah, I would agree with that because I said, we've started to see in some places, banks are offering a preferential rate on financing for assets which have certain sustainability criteria. So I absolutely agree that that kind of mechanism is going to be very, very supportive.
Catherine, what's the biggest challenge for you at the minute around sustainability and the global goals?
I think for me is once you've got through the easy wins, none of which are easy, or the things that are low cost, no cost, behavioral, which in itself operating across 6,300 hotels, right, trying to get that out to so many different hotels is a challenge in its own right. Once you get through those points that make economic sense and commercial sense, then there's a whole raft of other measures that don't make sense, right? Things that have a 15-year payback period. With the best will in the world, you and I wouldn't do that in our own homes. So actually, it's then, I think that is the challenge. It all comes down, unfortunately, at the end to the economics. So as Anouar was saying, finding sources of finance to actually support that, or we work with a lot of companies. As a company in the US we work with that helps to find incentives for owners, literally on a hotel by hotel basis. There are lots of incentives out there. So how do we do more of that to actually make the return on investment much more attractive?
So nearly individualizing it and breaking it down to make it totally understood by a particular business or person, indeed.
Yeah.
This podcast is fabulous because it shares best practice, and Catherine's already talked about the importance of collaboration and learning. And, there just seems to be so much advice everywhere. But If you could encourage our listeners to read one piece of research or one report that has inspired you to be more responsible, what would it be? Catherine.
This space is changing so quickly, be it the regulation that's coming in or the tools and the solutions. So I think, keeping yourself educated, Reuters, The Economist, the Financial Times, and all, lots of these publications have sustainability sections. They have excellent reporters who really know their stuff. Podcasts like this obviously are great. For me personally, what's inspired me, there's a great, the Outrage and Optimism podcast, which is Christiana Figueres, is brilliant. So that is a great podcast, and it's very current, links it to business, the challenges. They have some excellent guests. But what sticks in my mind, that there was a podcast that sadly finished last year called Green Biz 350. And it's the Trellis network of it's very much for a business, the business community. And there was somebody called Renee Lertzman who actually was talking about leadership in sustainability, which I think is so pertinent. And I talk to a lot of people in my position around how do we actually get this done? Because it's hard, and you have to be resilient. Your teams have to be resilient. And just the definition of leadership in this space is really, really changing in terms of, getting close to those deadlines, the people that you have to really engage with. So for me, it was almost 2 years ago now, but it really, really hit home to me.
Anouar, what about you?
So Catherine mentioned that the definition of leadership is changing, and I couldn't agree more with that. The book that I read and really inspired me is Dare to Lead by Brené Brown. It starts with the notion that we're all leaders in our own sense, from young professionals to people in senior leadership. But as a leader, you need to take responsibility for finding the potential in people and processes, and you need to have courage. And I think courage is a really important skill for us as a society to further develop, and will really help in changing the way we think in business, but also outside of that, and can be a real contributor to the change to a more sustainable society.
Yeah, I think you can be a leader at any level. I suppose that some people think, really? I'm not getting paid the same as the person at the top, so why should I? But it's not about that. It's just about different choices and finding a voice and knowing that, yes, it's a complicated area, but it's okay to ask questions and it's okay to have conversations. I think that's the key. And again, back to why I love presenting this podcast, because I get to meet fantastic guests such as yourselves to have these conversations. So final question then, as responsible leaders, what are you personally committed to doing more of or less of in the coming year, or both? Anouar?
I would like to be more committed in raising this issue of ESG and sustainability with our clients whenever we're discussing M&A. I think it's becoming more at the forefront and more consideration, but less enough a conversation. And I would like to be, to start this conversation more often with our clients, for starters.
Are you going to do anything less of personally as an individual?
Oh, that's also a good one. I think travel. I mean, I still travel quite a bit, and that's more on a personal note. So also practicing what I preach, I should be more mindful of that.
Catherine, same question to you. As a responsible leader, what are you personally committed to doing more of or less of in the coming year?
I think mine's kind of similar to Anouar, actually, in terms of, for me, I feel very energized, and I think I can have the biggest impact when I am talking to others in my position or talking to young leaders in this space, because, as I said, I think we gain so much through collaboration. And I think, many leaders in sustainability in different companies are feeling the same barriers or the same pain. And actually, it really helps to talk it through. So I've been doing more of that since the start of this year, and it's certainly really, really helping me.
And less of?
Probably the same again as Anouar, probably less travel, but then that can be difficult, right? To try and see people. So, but there's little things like, it's kind of walking instead of taking the car, or taking the train instead of taking the car. So I think it's, I think for anybody with sustainability, people have to feel that things aren't being taken away from them, or else it's never going to stick. It's making the small changes that make the difference, rather than telling people, well, you can't get on the plane and go on holiday anymore. Because
we need to make it easy as well. Yeah. Catherine and Anouar, thank you so much for joining us for this great discussion all around these global goals. And thank you for sharing your experiences and your insight into what's working and what we could be doing more of. Definitely a little more government support would help. I hope you've enjoyed tuning in, everyone. You have, of course, been listening to The Lens with me, Sarah Travers. And remember, if your business would like help with developing its ESG actions and impacts, and you'd like to find out more about the global goals, or you're keen to go faster, braver and bolder to become more responsible, then please do visit www.bitc.org.uk. There's a toolkit on there all about strategy, and it's fabulous. Thank you so much for listening, and do tune in next time.